Hello everyone, welcome back to my latest video. In this video, I would like to talk about one of the most important events in Indian history. One of in the last phase of our freedom struggle against the British Raj. This one is largely forgotten, but this event is believed to be the one that actually ended British rule in India for good. It is called the 1946 Royal Indian Navy Mutiny. As stated in this title, this happened sometime in February 1946. This is this event is largely not taught in our history textbooks, but historians who have researched into this believe that this is the event that actually ended the British Raj for good. The mutiny put pressure on the Britishers to quit. How so? I will explain further. So as I explained earlier, this the until this revolt, the British Raj in India and the empire elsewhere had sustained through a large number of revolts. Even before the 1946 mutiny, there had been movements against the British Raj, as everybody knows. The 1942 Quit India movement, civil disobedience, non-cooperation and all that, and Subhash Chandra Bose's INA by allying with Japan had also attempted to liberate India. Unfortunately, the British Empire had managed to weather all of that and had managed to sustain itself. However, shortly after World War II in 46, soldiers in the Indian Armed Forces, particularly in the Royal Indian Navy, who had sworn an oath of loyalty to the British Crown, for several reasons which I will state later, they revolted against the British authorities. And because of this, this revolt is said to be the one which firmly broke the backbone of British rule in India for good. This revolt kind of hastened the departure of the British from India. The British were meaning to depart, but it had been at their own leisure, probably after a couple of decades or so. But this revolt hastened it. So how many people took part in this revolt? Now this revolt started with the Royal Indian Navy but spread to other branches of the armed forces, Indian armed forces as well. Even the Air Force and the Army joined in as well. In case of the Air Force, the pilots who are in charge of piloting the planes, they literally grounded the planes forcefully and refused to help in suppressing the mutiny in the Indian Navy. So this revolt started in the Indian Navy, right? How many sailors took part? As it is believed that close to something about 20,000 sailors took part. That's right, something about 20,000. But in those times, this was a pretty big number. 20,000. So this 20,000 sailers, they were comprised of various religions, various Indian communities. They all banded together to revolt against their British superiors and to revolt against British suppression and oppression, and they helped a lot in our freedom struggle in a way. All of this I'll talk about later. I'll explain in detail further. So, what was the, shall we say, um, as I said earlier, this the mutiny of 1946. There is a book written by an author called Pramod Kapoor. He titled it as the last war of independence, which is fitting because it was literally the last fight by Indian people, in particular Indian soldiers or sailors, I should say in this case, against the British authorities. The last in a series of movements and rebellions against the British Raj that had been happening over the decades of their rule. So what happened? But this revolt is particularly important. Why? What happened because of this? Number one, there was a realization on the part of the British because of what happened. See, there is this Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. After independence, he had given an interview before the BBC, where he was asked as to what had uh, entailed the British to leave India so soon, given that the Quit India movement, which had been recognized as the last major movement against the British Raj, had petered out by the end of World War II, and the British were in seemingly no hurry to leave. So what made them leave? But Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar said that it was the revolt of the Indian soldiers or sailors influenced by the actions of Subhash Chandra Bose and his INA that forced the British to leave. He said that until then the British had been confident that whatever Indian politicians got up to, whatever protests they made and all, they could never hope to shift the loyalties of the Indian soldiers. The British Empire in India literally rested upon the loyalty of the Indian soldier to the crown. It was like kind of like the backbone. Even at the height of the British Raj, only a handful of Englishmen were on site in India to rule. They literally relied on Indian administrators and Indian soldiers and so on to enforce their rule. So ever since 1947, sorry, let me amend myself, 1857. Ever since 1857, the first Indian revolt that had happened on the part of the Indian soldiers and the various Indian nobles at the time, the Britishers had taken all means to ensure that a mass scale revolt against them never happened again, or even if it happened on a scale which they could manage. So they had restructured the Indian army in such a way that the people who were selected in the Indian army were ones who were certified as loyal to the crown, and they had kept this for over 90 years, ever since 1857. But because of this 1946 revolt, it brought back memories of 1857 to the British, the one thing they had always been afraid of. So what happened was, the British finally, because of this revolt, realized that the one thing they had been relying on, the Indian soldiers' loyalty, was also gone. It was no longer, the Indian soldier was no longer dependable to maintain the British Empire. So essentially the 1946 revolt made the British realize that their time in India was over. And not just Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, no less a person than Prime Minister Clement Attlee, who was the Prime Minister at the time of the revolt, in 1953 when he visited India and was hosted by the Governor of West Bengal at the time. The Governor asked him what had entailed India to leave so soon, just as what the BBC had asked Ambedkar. And he said that, and he gave pretty much the same answer, that the actions of the Indian sailors and soldiers in 1946, influenced by the actions of Subhash Chandra Bose and his INA during World War II. So no less a person than British Prime Minister Clement Attlee himself stated that the 1946 revolt was the one that caused our independence, hastened it, so to say. So this was it. So another thing this revolt happened was, even though the 1946 revolt was suppressed because of lack of leadership and British superiority and all, but because the British realized that their time in India was over, so they moved on to more steps to grant independence to India. This step, one day after the revolt was over, the British Parliament in Britain announced the Cabinet Mission. This was the Cabinet Mission, as most of you would know, was sent in order to discuss the status of India after the British left. That what would India be like? What sort of government would constitute independent India, and so on, in such a way that ties to Britain were not severed, of course. But this cabinet mission sent by Britain would not have happened without the 1946 mutiny. So that played an important role. The 1946 mutiny hastened the move towards independence. And like I said earlier, the timing of our independence was hastened. During the Quit India movement, there had been this viceroy called Lord Linlithgow. He had suppressed the Quit India movement successfully, and during there have been records released of his conversations with his superiors in London, where he had revealed that the suitable time to grant independence in India was around 1973. Imagine that. The British literally had no intentions of giving independence to India as soon as 1947. They planned to extend their rule up till 1973. This is not just speculation on my part. There have been documents unearthed by historians and all, Indian historians to be sure, which have proven uh, this laxity on the part of the British to grant independence. Makes sense, of course, because India was regarded as the crown jewel of the empire, and of course a cash cow when it came to uh, filling the coffers of the empire. So the British in really were in no hurry to let go of India, but the 1946 mutiny forced their hand and accelerated their departure. So again, yes, and the timing of the British departure was hastened because of this. So that said, that there were the 1946 mutiny ended on a bitter note. This soldiers and sailors from all walks of life, from all religions, all communities throughout India, they united in an effort against the British authorities. And had this mutiny gone on for gone on without interruption, it is possible that the in that India's independence would have come even sooner than 1947. It was like literally a war of sorts. Unfortunately, what happened is, according to Pramod Kapoor in his book The Last War of Independence, the uh, the prominent politicians of the time were I will not name them. Their names are well known, but the politicians of the time who were they persuaded the mutineers in the navy and armed forces to surrender themselves to the British on promises of leniency, on promises that whatever grievances they had, they would be redressed. It is worth noting that at the time the British were still in charge. Independence hadn't arrived, so the politicians had no authority or to do anything about the conditions of the sailors. And as it happened, and they were promised that they would not be victimized. None of those promises were fulfilled, and once the surrender happened, they were unceremoniously dismissed from the armed forces. It is said that they were not even given, none of their conditions were redressed. They were literally let go without notice. A lot of them are arrested and put in camps, um, and after it was certain amount of time of harsh detention in camps, the British simply issued them one-way tickets to go home. They were released into civilian life with no redress, no chance of reinstatement in the armed forces. And this sorry state of affairs continued even after independence, mind you. The independent governments of India and Pakistan refused to reinstate the harshly dismissed sailors of the mutiny, stating that because they had rebelled, they were not trustworthy. Never mind that these sailors were on the same level as our other Indian fighters, and they had fought for our independence, and that they were the reason why independence came in 47 and not much later as the British had envisioned. Essentially, this whole story ended on a rather bitter note for those who were involved. So, moving ahead, how did this mutiny happen? Why did soldiers who had sworn their loyalty, who had sworn oaths to the crown, why did they rebel? So during World War II, what had happened was there were essentially the conditions in India were such that Indians didn't really have much recourse for better livelihoods other than joining the Indian armed forces under the British control. There were recruitment centers all over India where the recruitees were promised good working conditions, salaries, adventures at sea, and so on. And uh, many of these uh, mutineers, who, as in people who would mutiny in the future during World War II, they served with uh, distinguishment on many fronts in Europe, in the Atlantic front, and especially in East Asia against the Japanese. They fought bravely. Even some of the British themselves recognized this. So they were lured there with promises of fair treatment, good working conditions, and good pay and so on. But as these recruitees joined the armed forces, they found that life was very different from what was promised, as it usually is in today's case as well. So one problem the Indian soldiers faced was systematic racism. So what happened is the British officers who were in charge of the Indian soldiers and sailors, the they used to treat them very badly. They used to subject them to constant racism. It is said that you couldn't even play Indian music in their presence without incurring their wrath, and they were often uh, addressed with derogatory terms and so on. The Indian quarters were designated as Black Town, and the sailors were subjected to constant abuse, as I stated earlier. They were given poor quality food to eat. They were given far less pay than their white counterparts. They were not even allowed to play Indian music and so on, if within earshot of the British officers, as simple as that. Then all pleasures of the life in the army, on the navy, I would say, all pleasures of life available to people in the navy went to the white officers and soldiers, not to the Indian soldiers. They were literally treated and worked like slaves. Then another complaint which I had already addressed earlier was the food crisis. So what happened? So the food that was served to the sailors, they're also known as ratings. Let's call them ratings. So the Indian ratings, they were served inedible dal and rice. Uh, Essentially, this food crisis was such that they were given inedible dal, the dal which was not properly cooked, which was unfit to eat, which probably was fit to be thrown on the ground or given to animals and such. Then the rice that was given to them, it was filled with stones. uh, Essentially, poor food was served to them. This was part of the abuse that the British officers subjected the Indian ratings to. By contrast, their British counterparts were given normal good food to eat. Again, this was part of the systemic racism of the times, especially in the armed forces. Now, sure, all of these are pretty good causes to mutiny. As it happened, there was also a political angle to the mutiny. So, the political angle being the INA influence. Now, before going further, I would like to explain how this served as a political angle to the mutiny. So After World War II, with the defeat of Japan and by extension the INA, soldiers of the Indian National Army of Subhash Chandra Bose were put on trial at the Red Fort and other places in India as well. They were branded as traitors to the Indian people and to the empire. And needless to say, the Indian people were extremely outraged at this treatment of what they pursued as their heroes. So the wide protests were staged throughout India against the INA trials. Then this mood also spread amongst the people of the armed forces who had fought on behalf of the British. They felt a sense of guilt pervaded throughout the Indian unit of the British armed forces, that they had been fighting on behalf of an empire that had oppressed them, while these people had fought bravely to liberate their country. So the INA trials also played a very important role in radicalizing the Indian soldiers in the British army and inciting them to revolt. Then move ahead. So how did this revolt happen? So apparently after all of eventually all of the factors I stated above, it reached a breaking point where there was this wireless operator. He is very famous now. He's named BC Dutt. Uh, he was in charge of radio communications and broadcasting at a port in Mumbai. There is a monument put over there now. So BC Dutt, aka Bolai Chandra Dutt. So in order to incite his fellow soldiers to mutiny, what had happened was there had been an occasion. This act of defense, what had happened is the British commander, there had been an event staged in Mumbai to celebrate the British Empire, and this event was scheduled to take place in a port in Bombay. Apparently the port was called as HMIS Talwar. It has a different name now. I believe it's called as Port Angre or something. So at that time it was known as HMIS Talwar. So BC Dutt, in order to start the mutiny, in order to encourage his fellow soldiers to mutiny along with him, the night before the event was to take place, he painted the two slogans Jai Hind and Quit India on the wooden platform of HMS Talwar, right where the British commander was supposed to stand as give his speech the following day. The Navy Day celebrations, as it turned out. Needless to say, once the whole thing was discovered, it created a ruckus, and the British were made a mockery of. Later on, investigations were conducted, and the final catalyst happened to be BC Dutt's arrest. He was discovered there were incriminating pamphlets and other material, anti-British material to speak, found in his locker, and there was this commander named King. He was a very racist fellow. He was actually the one responsible for the mutiny because of racist comments and disorderly conduct towards the Indian ratings. He used to insult Indian ratings on a regular basis, and he was very infamous for his anti-Indian racism at the time. So this Commander King found that and had him arrested. And BC Dutt was apparently quite popular among his fellow Indian ratings, and his unjust arrest, as they saw it, pushed the other ratings to breaking point. They couldn't take it anymore. It is said that when Commander King was exiting the port at the time, Indians' ratings literally pelted his car and surrounded him and his car, shouting the same slogans that BC Dutt had painted on the dais. So on February 18, 1946, the mutiny began. The ratings first started a hunger strike, they put forth their demands, stating that they wanted their grievances redressed, they wanted good food, good facilities on par with their white counterparts, and their demands also were political. They wanted the release of the INA people put on trial. They wanted the withdrawal of the Indian forces stationed at various places in the British Empire at the time, particularly in East Asia. And when these demands were not met, the HMIS, the Talwar, the ship to be precise, it was taken over by the Indian ratings. The takeover started. Then, as I said earlier, there were 20,000 sailors who took part in this uprising, and after the and the mobilization of all the people in the Indian Army, in the Indian Navy, it took about 48 hours. That much the discontent that was seeping among the Indian people in the British Navy, largely because of the way they had been treated. So within 48 hours, the ratings were joined by 20,000 plus sailors. Then along with HMIS Talwar, all over India, all over the ports in India, nearly 78 ships were seized. Then there was a committee that was formed by the mutineers. This was led by MS Khan, not just MS Khan. There were actually three leaders who led the uprising. MS Khan, then there was a Hindu and a Sikh as well. So essentially the mutiny became a multi-religious mutiny. It united people across all religions, not people of any particular religion just. So the strike committee, as it was called at the time, they organized the mutiny. Then the British Admiralty at the time was stunned by the sheer scale of the mutiny. So they were at a loss on what to do. So the standoff continued for quite a couple of days. It continued until February 23, 1946. Then in Bombay this happened. Then, like I said earlier, it's not just here. Even the Indian Army and Air Force were influenced into joining in as a result of this. Then, as I said earlier, all the people across all religions and communities were united. What sort of unity was there? So at the time, the Indian flag that was popular, the Indian flag we all know today, the the orange, the tricolor with the Ashok Chakra in the middle, that was after independence. Before then, the first Indian flag that had been used for during the freedom movement, it was the tricolor, and the ratings, the tricolor that they raised during the mutiny, it comprised of the green crescent and hammer and sickle. So the importance of this flag was that there was a solidarity throughout there was a solidarity. Essentially the ratings exemplified that they were united by a common cause, that they did not see religious difference as any problem, that difference of religion, race, community, it didn't matter. They were all united for the one purpose of redressing their grievances and for being with the Indian people in their time of struggle against British oppression. So symbolic unity was a thing. Then as I said earlier, the message of this mutiny was that the ratings rejected religious division. The strike committee that led the rebellion was literally comprised of MS Khan, a Muslim, the Hindu and the Sikh as well. So, they asserted that their only identity was that of Indians. What religion they belonged to was immaterial, and that the reason why they waged this mutiny was because they wanted to earn freedom for the Indian people. They they wanted to redress the fact that they had been serving their oppressors, and they wanted to stand at one with the Indian people and their fellow freedom fighters as well. So essentially, the unity that was sustained by the Indian ratings was something that the political leadership at that time had not been able to sustain. If I will not speak further on this, but as everybody knows, there had been several parties. The Congress party was there, then the Muslim League had been formed under Jinnah. There had been Hindu-Muslim differences for a long time in politics, even leading as far as to riots. And this difference culminated in the partition of India in 47. It has been stated by many people that had the 1946 mutiny been allowed to run its course, then there would have been a sort of revolution against the British Empire, and the partition of India and the after effects which we are still suffering from today could possibly have been avoided. But that's speculative history. What ifs, as historians like to indulge in. No point in indulging in that. Then as now normally mutineers would not really have much support, since they would be seen as breaking the chain of command and disobeying orders and the rightful authorities. As it happened, the Indian people did not see the British authorities as rightful authorities because they enjoyed public support. As I said earlier, the heart of the mutiny was the HMIS Talwar, located in Bombay, or Mumbai as we call it now. So Mumbai also rose in revolt, and there are eyewitness accounts stating that the people of Mumbai, they used to, when the British themselves blockaded the mutineers on the ships in order to prevent supplies from coming in, the people of Bombay took matters into their own hands and brought food to the rebelling sailors as a show of solidarity and support against the British authorities. And not just that, it is said that there were literal battles happening in Bombay, something equivalent to the battles fought during World War II. The British tanks had literally been mobilized on the streets of Bombay at the time. And moving ahead, so this, as I said earlier, the mutiny started in February 1846 and ended on 23 1946. It was literally like a 5-day battle, right on equivalent with the battles of World War II, which is fitting since this mutiny happened right after World War II ended. So as I said earlier, February 18, the strike happened on the ship HMIS Talwar, the initial protest being over food and racism, the poor quality food and the racist treatment by the British officers, in particular by Commander King. He is particularly notorious for causing the mutiny due to his racism. Then next on February 19, the mutiny spread like fire all across ports and ships in India. As I said earlier, some 20,000 sailors all over India joined in, all across India. Even there were signs of mutiny all the way across to Karachi, which is now in Pakistan as well. That was there. Then, of course, the British did not take this lying down, and the Admiralty, the head of the British Navy at the time, and on February 20, they issued an ultimatum that if the rebels did not stand down, the ships all across India, the Indian ports to speak, would all be destroyed by cannon fire. That British ships would be brought in to destroy the sailors rebelling on the Indian ships across the ports. This ultimatum was issued. There was this fellow called as Ian Fleming, I think. I don't remember his name, but there was this particular British captain, this member of the British Admiralty. He tried to put down the revolt, but he abysmally failed. He would later on become his assistant, whose name was Ian Fleming. He would use his superior as his inspiration for the character R in the famous James Bond series. But coming back to the point, on February 20, there was an ultimatum issued, and the next day, all across Mumbai, the British had finally started giving battle to the mutineering sailors and to civilians who are supporting the mutineers in Mumbai. There were street battles on February 21st all across the city. It is estimated that some 200 plus civilians ended up being shot by British guns and tanks and so on. That's a pretty huge number. Right on par with the way the British had suppressed revolts and movements in the past. So there were huge street battles. Then the mutineers, it is said, were negotiating with the British, and the mutiny had reached quite the crescendo. Then on February 23, the politicians of the day, our Indian politicians, they gave empty promises to the sailors that if they stood down, they would be treated well, they would not be victimized. So the sailors did not want the mutiny to end, since they believed that if they carried on further, they could achieve what they wanted. However, the people of the strike committee realized that they were outnumbered and outgunned, and if they carried on, they could virtually end up being annihilated. So they had no choice but to end the mutiny, and they ended up being taken into custody, put into camps, given harsh treatment and all, brutally interrogated, and then later on they ended up being unceremoniously discharged from the armed forces without any benefits, without any hope of reinstatement in the armed forces in the future, just dumped into civilian life without any recourse. Like I said earlier, it's a pretty sad tale of how the mutiny ended. So that said, there were differences, as I said earlier. The political leadership of the time and the naval ratings or sailors, there were huge differences between their methods and desires and goals. So number one is, when it comes to the naval ratings, did this because they felt guilty about fighting on behalf of the oppressors of their people, and they wanted an immediate revolution that would end things with their British superiors once and for all, and possibly bring about a revolution on par with other revolutions throughout the world. One could say the French Revolution or the Bolshevik Revolution and so on. Essentially, they literally wanted to overthrow the British authorities by force and establish an independent India on their own terms. The political leadership had other ideas, of course. They wanted our political leadership, they had been educated and heavily influenced by British ideas and culture. So they wanted to maintain relations with the British, so they opted for a transfer of power rather than a revolutionary overthrow. They wanted to negotiate transfer of power from British to themselves. Essentially, as one sailor derisively said post-rebellion, something exchanging cabinet seats. That's what the political leadership sought to do. Then one of the methods of naval ratings was armed defiance and strikes, very similar to what had happened in 1857. This was something that the British especially had been afraid of since 1857, because 1857, the revolt, although it was a failure, the British were haunted by the ghosts of 1857. They were haunted by how close that revolt had come to literally ending it all. So the 1946 Indian Mutiny frightened them to the same extent, and the ratings sought armed defiance and strikes from both the point of angle of their working conditions and also from political angle. Then the political leadership, by contrast, sought dialogues. They wanted to come to a compromise with the British rather than a violent revolution, which they believe could potentially have made things worse. They wanted to um, ensure that some sort of relationship remained with the British even after they left. So another thing is, the naval ratings, they wanted to break the oppressive system itself. They wanted to destroy the system and replace it with a better system for themselves and for the Indian people. By contrast, the political leadership believed that rebellious behavior on the part of Indian soldiers and sailors could pose problems for themselves in the future. So, which is why they implored the ratings and other rebels to stand down. It is said that Muhammad Ali Jinnah, when he was visited by the ratings to seek guidance, he said that he disapproved of their rebellion, stating that he wanted uniform and discipline in the Pakistan Navy. Those were his exact words. Then some of our other Indian politicians also at the time were pretty dismissive of the rebellion, believing that it compromised the goal of freedom, the way that they wanted to attain freedom for India. Then the naval ratings stance was pretty radical and uncompromising. They wanted to overthrow the British authorities by force and establish their own system for what they believed was right for the Indian people. By contrast, when it comes to the seasoned politicians of the time, they were pretty cautious. Uh, they believed that violent revolution would only cause more problems in the future, so they wanted the ratings to stand down. They were pretty dismissive of the efforts of the people who were mutinying, despite the fact that the people mutinying had taken great risks to do so, despite their abysmal conditions at the time. So so essentially the political leadership and the rebels were not really united on one front. There were several issues. The Indian freedom struggle is really a story of conflicts and issues pervading. Uh, Essentially, that's how the Indian freedom struggle was. It wasn't a clean fight against the British. There were various movements, various struggles, differences of opinion and ideas among the freedom fighters themselves, whether it be among politicians or the Indian military. So essentially, the Indian freedom struggle is a rather messy story, not as clean as it is portrayed in our school textbooks and so on. Then why is now, according to Pramod Kapoor, who in his book The Last War of Independence, the 1946 mutiny was the last war. Why? Why is it regarded as the last war by him and those who have done research on this? Number one is, it dealt a fatal blow to the British Empire in India. As I have said earlier, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar testified to this, and also no less a person than the British Prime Minister of the day, Clement Attlee, after independence, also testified to this. The primary pillar of British rule in India, the foundation of British rule, had been the loyalty of the Indian soldier to the crown. That loyalty ended up being broken in 46, and the British, who had always been afraid of the ghost of 1857, now they once again they were haunted by the memories of 1857, and so they made quick moves to depart India in haste, in fear. So the colonial power in India ended up being broken for good by the mutiny and the subsequent protests that followed afterwards. Then this was one this mutiny is particularly spectacular for the fact that total unity was achieved. Sailors and soldiers and people all from all religions and communities across India united in one stance against the British. And BC Dutt and other people who were interviewed after the rebellion, they said that had they been allowed to continue on as they did, they could have potentially achieved a revolution, united people all across India, and maybe even averted partition of India itself. That's what they believe. We don't know what would have happened, since it is all a part of what ifs that historians indulge in. So there's no point in indulging in whether partition would have been averted or not. But this mutiny was a step forward in religious unity, in secularism, as has been enshrined in the Indian Constitution. Then this mutiny is now believed to have been the catalyst for speedy British withdrawal from India. As I said earlier, the leading British figures at the time, they had been toying with the idea of withdrawing from India for like after 50 years or even a century after World War II, which means that they were planning on ruling India up until the present day. Or at the very least, as Lord Linlithgow had once said, he believed British rule would be necessary for India, for a stable India until 1973 at the least. Which means the British did not mean to quit India as soon as they did. They wanted to carry on and on. They wanted to continue looting India to sustain themselves. But the 1946 mutiny broke their fantasies of a continued rule over India, and they were forced to withdraw as quickly as they could to save their own skins. Then this is somewhat dangerous to speak about, but not just the British, but even after independence, this mutiny was largely forgotten, because it kind of contradicts the doctrine of non-violence, which has been propounded as the main reason for freedom. This, along with several other armed struggles that took place throughout India during the British Raj, they provide a diverse view on the Indian freedom struggle. They provide that apart from non-violence, other means also helped. But but it was felt that it would be wiser to bury the memory of the 1946 mutiny, and so after independence this was completely forgotten. But in recent years, the mutiny has once again been remembered and cherished. In 2022, the Indian Navy held a celebration of the revolt during their Navy Day celebrations a long time after the revolt took place. So, which is why it is important for all of us to remember this event. And yes, as I said earlier, this was like the pivotal event. The literal cause of independence was this 1946 mutiny. So it's important to remember this, because we Indians aren't really taught well about this. We usually only see one or two lines of this in our Indian history textbooks, and we are usually told of the revolt by the British themselves or by other foreigners. It is about time we remembered this. We remember the legacy of the people who sacrificed their lives and careers for the sake of our freedom. They were freedom fighters on line with Gandhi, Nehru, and others as well. So it's about time we remembered them. So thank you all for watching this video. I hope this video has proved very enlightening to you all, particularly regarding a forgotten chapter of our freedom struggle against the British. If those of you who want to know more about this, I would recommend Pramod Kapoor's book. It is called the Last War of independence. You can forgive me for my poor handwriting. This is called the last war. The last war. The last war of independence. The last war of independence. This is, you could say, a very famous book. It was written, like, it was released in 2022. This book is a very enlightening book, very readable, very instructive. This book details all the details of the 1946 rebellion that I just spoke about in this video. For if those of you want to explore this topic in further detail, I suggest you all explore this book, buy this book. This book is freely available on Amazon and probably on the internet as well. So you can all buy this and read about this forgotten chapter of our freedom struggle. It's pretty entertaining as well. So there are the timings of the rebellion. It is all detailed in a very military style. It's very educative, very knowledgeable. So yes, so as I said earlier, I would recommend to you all this book. So go ahead and buy it, and of course please refer my video as well should you have any doubts. And thank you all for taking the time to watch this video. Please uh, please watch, like, and recommend this video to anyone else you know. Please also subscribe to my history channel at Siddharth History Z8H for more of my history videos. I thank you once again though. I thank you all for watching this video. Please recommend my channel as well to anyone else you know. The history channel I spoke about at Siddharth History Z8H, which this video is on. So once again, thank you all for taking the time to watch this video. Thank you for your time, every one of you. Thank you. Thank you.